Well, joining us now in studio to discuss land invasions and measures to address both occupiers and the landowners are Mr. Ian Cameron, AfriForum's Head of Safety, and Mr. Uhuru Dikgangwilo, the MEC of Human Settlements. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening to you.
Well, let me start with you, MEC. Just talk to us about the backlog, perhaps, of things like the RDP House initiative, which sometimes people actually use as an excuse to go out and occupy land because they feel that they're frustrated at government's processes.
Well, if you think about how many houses government has delivered since 1994, over 3.5 million houses for free to the people that are deserving, in line with the letter and spirit of the Constitution that we should provide housing to those in need. I think that is a massive delivery record, ever recorded in the world, by the way. Secondly, we're the only country that provides free housing for the poor, you know. And so I think there is a progressive realization of that right, access to housing. Mm-hmm. And I think this government has really done its part. Of course, the number keeps on increasing, you know. In Gauteng, I have 1.2 million people that are looking for houses. I've got 5.7 billion rand budget. That is never going to be enough to give a house for everybody. In addition, people are looking for land, and land has been locked into private hands, so not really able to locate, you know, land that is suitable, that is closer to economic activities, so that, you know, we can expedite delivery of houses for those that can deliver houses for themselves, but also to make land available for those that want to build houses for themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's just a question of working together to realize what the Constitution of the Republic wants us to do, to ensure that everybody's dignity is restored, because without a home, you don't have a dignity.
Of course. And Mr. Cameron, just talk to us about AfriForum's view on land invasions.
Well, obviously, we feel very strongly about the fact that we need to make sure that we protect the private landowners' right to owning property. It's very important that the different state entities, for example, law enforcement agencies, are able to do their jobs effectively when it comes to land invasion. And we feel strongly, and well, let's rather say we understand the plight of people out there who want property, and we need to find a peaceful way to resolve the matter. But at the moment, we see in some cases that it's resorting to violence, and the wrong people are getting hurt. I think the doors that should be knocked on aren't the private landowners themselves, and unfortunately, we now see many misrepresentations coming from certain organizations, creating the impression that the land issue is simply a problem of private land ownership.
We are joined on the phone line by Lieutenant K. Makubela, the SAPS spokesperson. A very good evening to you, Lieutenant. Thank you so much for joining us. I just talked about the role of the SAPS in dealing with land invasions. Are there successful cases of arrests and prosecutions coming from the police perspective?
Is that our role is to keep law and order and to make sure that the court orders which are being obtained by those who own those land are executed by the sheriff. That is the role of the police. Yes, if there are cases which are opened for an example, trespassing, we do investigate such cases, and if they are suspects, they are arrested.
And do you find, Lieutenant, that the public, members of the public, are actually confident enough in the police force to report some issues of land invasions where they suspect that someone is actually violating the law?
What people must do in terms of the land invasion, they know the processes, what's supposed to be done when there is a owner of that particular land. If you feel that there are people who are coming to occupy your space, you go to court, and the court will issue a court order which will be executed by the sheriff. And yes, before the sheriff can go and execute that court order, they will pass by the police station for the police to escort the sheriff to make sure that they execute their duties.
Mm-hmm. And Lieutenant, what are the charges that people face if they actually commit land grabs, because they are illegal according to the law?
As I'm indicating to you, that the police's role is when a person feels that there are people who occupied their space without the permission or gripping it by force. They have to follow the processes, which will be the court. And the court will issue those orders, and the sheriff will have to come to the police, and the police will escort the sheriff to execute the duties. It's not the police to remove people from where they are occupying their spaces.
Lieutenant, please stay with us on the phone line. Mr. Cameron, I see you shaking your head. Do you disagree with some of the statements that the Lieutenant is making?
I very strongly disagree. There's a definite court process that can be followed, but according to the police's own regulations regarding land invasion, those people can immediately be charged with trespassing and can be immediately removed and arrested. The problem with the court process on its own is that it takes a very long time, very often, and unfortunately, because these land grabs often start with, for example, 10 people and turns into 700 people, it's impossible for either the government or for the private landowner to immediately go to court so quickly. So the police are actually passing the buck by saying we should go straight to court. The police must make sure that when a member of the public or government lays a charge of trespassing, the police have to act immediately, unless the people receive undisturbed living rights on that land. That means that the owner of that land, or the rightful owner of that land, hasn't immediately laid a charge of trespassing, and therefore they now have to approach the court, and then it becomes a civil matter, which is a very lengthy process. So it's crucial that the police understand their role and have to act immediately.
Lieutenant, do you care to respond to that regarding the ability of the police to actually arrest somebody who's found trespassing on the spot?
I'm saying, yes, indeed, if somebody open a case of trespassing, that is a criminal case. We will act and we will make sure that those people are arrested and the matter is investigated. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But if people occupy spaces where you found that there are many and they already stayed for more than 24 hours, as the gentleman is indicating there, he knows what is expected for the owner of the land. Not within the police to remove people. Our job is not to remove people. Our job is to restore law and order.
Which is coming to Mr. Mulwa. When people occupy land, what are the rules regarding when they get removed? Is it that government has to give them shelter when they move them from the land that they occupied? You know, do they have to give them housing? What is the duration that they're actually allowed to be on that land before government has to intervene?
No, let's start here. No one has got the right to occupy land illegally. Mm-hmm. So we must start from there. It's a criminal offense. Because government has a program, an orderly, integrated, coordinated, legal way of locating people that are looking for land, for human settlement, for agriculture, for business, and so on. There are laws in this country. Mm-hmm. So there's no one who must occupy the land, any land for that matter, illegally. So we start from there. You occupy the land illegally, you occupy any property illegally without permission, it's a criminal offense. And the law has got responsibility, once it's made aware that there is crime, to act. Now, there is this misinterpretation of the intention of the highest court in the land on a matter of what is popularly known as the Grootboom case, where the people that had squatted in a particular piece of land for many years were to be evicted, and that matter went to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court, correctly so, said that these people have been in this land for so many years. If you evict them, you've got to find an alternative accommodation. Now, that becomes the responsibility of government. And indeed, in a letter of ensuring that we achieve what the Constitution really seeks to achieve, we must make sure that all people that have got a hunger for land, for agriculture, for business, for economy, must have access to land in an orderly and legal fashion. So it's a criminal offense to occupy any land, you know.
And Mr. Cameron, just talk to us about some of the cases where you've actually, AfriForum has actually represented some of the private landowners who've actually had their land invaded or people trespassing on their land.
I think a very relevant case is actually a case of a family, a Sotho family who had a land claim about 15 years ago in the Walmanstal area just north of Pretoria, where their land was being invaded, and a group of almost 1,000 land invaders just 2 or 3 years back invaded this piece of land and started erecting structures. We had the same challenge with the police that said, but no, we have to follow the court procedure, and eventually we had to get an urgent court order against the police to actually act and not get the court to evict the people through the sheriff or whatever that procedure might be. The fact of the matter is the majority of times that we have had to do this, the fault wasn't actually necessarily on the people who invaded side, and the reason for this is they are also misled by people on ground level. I think of the Olivenhout-Bosch case about 2 months ago, where a group from one of the political parties in Olivenhout-Bosch area encouraged people to take land, and they asked the people in Olivenhout-Bosch to pay them 100 Rand per stand. So now you've got a criminal element coming into this, where certain individuals are now enriching themselves by misleading the poor and giving the idea that they are now providing land to the poor. And unfortunately, this creates a vicious cycle of people losing hope. And I agree with what the MEC said. I think it's very important that we follow due process and that we engage on the right levels in order to resolve the matter.
So, MEC, then to cure this disease called ignorance, where do people find information from then if they want to claim that they don't know what to do if they want land?
You know, there's currently a constitutional review process, and I think it's well publicized. On the 26th of July, the people of Gauteng will be around the table discussing the land question. Now, one of the things that we need to address, the Agri-Forum and everybody else that has got access to land, well, the majority don't have access to land, and I think my friend here would, would agree to that. There's land injustice. There's land ownership by the minority, and the majority of the people of the country don't have access to land. This is a historical problem that needs to be addressed. We'll be debating this issue, and I think Parliament will converge and take into account what the people of South Africa are saying about land injustice. And as South Africans, on behalf of future generations, their stability and peace and prosperity, we need to resolve the land question. All of these things that are happening are a consequence of a matter that was deferred, which is land justice. And I think as a nation we need to become awake of the reality that if we do not address the land question, there's never going to be peace in this country. But of course people should always respect the rule of law. What is mentioning about the Olivenhout-Bosch case where people are occupying the land, now they are burning and looting, they're burning tires everywhere, they're stopping people from going to work. This is criminal activity that must be combated at all costs. Of course, we've got to respect the right to life, but the public property also has to be respected. So we've got the responsibility as a nation to address our challenges in an orderly fashion than what people sometimes really seek to do. There's no easy answers. There is land for economy, and people are using land for economic activities. We need to respect that. There is idle land in private hands that is basically lying there for speculation. And we are taking a position here that Section 25 of the Constitution provides for land to be redistributed for public interest. And where land is idle, let's start there. We have just started with land in the ownership of government, by the way, the land in the ownership of the state. We are, as human settlement in Gauteng, as a collective of cabinet under the leadership of the Premier, expropriating government-owned land for public interest. Once we're done with that, we've got to get into private land, because it's never going to be enough just for, to use the land that is owned by government. We've got to go into the land that is owned by private individuals, particularly the land that's not being used for economic activities. I don't think there's anyone who says that, when the land is being used for productive activities, you can just invade that particular land without regard to the investment that individual citizens have made. I've always insisted there is no South African who is less South African. We are all bound and united by the Constitution of the Republic since it was adopted in 1996. We are citizens of the Republic, and all of us must have access to land. And I think that is the justice that everybody in this country should be seeking to achieve. talking to each other, we should be able to find solutions to these challenges. But there is no excuse for people to violate the law, and in pursuit of their interests, either for human settlement or for any other activity. For that one, definitely the law must take its course, and the police must act when crime is committed. I definitely do not necessarily agree with the police officer to complicate a simple matter as someone has violated the law and the matter is reported to the police. It is the responsibility of the police to look at what the law says, and indeed if someone has violated the law, the police must act. There is another legislation called Criminal Matters Amendment Act, which basically imposes 30 years of imprisonment if someone is found guilty, particularly as it relates to strategic infrastructure. This subculture of blocking national freeways is a serious offense because
it disrupts a lot of businesses actually in the country.
Absolutely. It basically negates even the reasons that makes people to go into the streets, correctly so, within their right to protest. We're simply saying people should definitely gather, protest, but they must protest peacefully. It is the responsibility of us who are in government to listen at people and work with them to find amicable solutions on their challenges. And no one says people don't have the right to protest here, but people have to respect the rule of law.
It's very true. And Cameron, just in rounding off the discussion, the views of AfriForum on the expropriation of land without compensation, the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution, and just your closing comments as well.
Well, I think it's very important. I agree with many of the points that the MEC raised. I think it's crucial that as many people as possible take part in the Constitutional Review Committee. Unfortunately, up to this point, a lot of people who have received land, whether it was through land claims or other processes, didn't receive the title deed for that land. So the question that we often ask is that if someone doesn't receive a title deed, it's as good as him not receiving land at all, because if you receive land, it strengthens your property right and it gives you an opportunity to partake in the economy. What we have found with regards to specifically agricultural land is that over 90% of farms that have been claimed fell into a pit of despair because a lot of the people who received the land didn't have the knowledge and the skills to serve that land, or rather work that land effectively. So it's crucial that we look at these points instead of just rushing to a certain conclusion. It's crucial that we find a sustainable way of creating reform, also not one group to the detriment of another. We have to find a way. In many provinces, government is the single largest individual landowner in that specific province, and it's crucial that we look at that right. I'm very glad to hear that government land is also being looked at to be expropriated, because if we simply are going to hit private landowners, it's going to make it very, very difficult. And I think if there's one thing that really can create conflict in this country, it's the land issue not being managed effectively.
Very true. Lieutenant, your closing comments, please.
Yeah, what I can say is that the people who are on the other side of the law, they must know that as the police, we want the state to arrest them. As we were monitoring the situation in Olwen Hot Wash since this morning, about 6 people were arrested who were disturbing the traffic and who were also blocking the roads and who were also wanted to go to block the freeway. So those people who are thinking that they can take the law into their own hands, they must know that the police will not hesitate to make sure that those people are arrested.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant. And closing comments from you, MEC.
Well, we can only call on South Africans to appreciate that they've got the best constitution in the world. This constitution provides for citizens to speak to each other and not across each other. There are challenges, definitely. The legacy of apartheid is not going to go away anytime soon. We need to address the historical imbalances that were created by colonialism and apartheid. We've got the responsibility to build a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa for a black child, for a white child, for an Indian child, for a colored child. Those children in future must not live our present, because I'm arguing that the present cannot be replicated by any generation in the future. It's a bad presence. That bad presence is land inequality, is levels of inequality between human beings that lives in this space called South Africa. We've got a responsibility as human beings to put our heads together and find lasting solutions to our country's problems. And we cannot do that by unleashing violence against each other or unleashing violence against pedestrians, against motorists and so on and so forth. This country is open for business. It's open for negotiations on every single challenge that the country is facing. And the people of this country have got absolutely no excuse to resort to violence in order to resolve their differences or challenges that they are confronted with. We are here as government to work with the people, but everything that we do must be about protecting, respecting, and upholding the letter and spirit of the Constitution. It must be about respecting the rule of law, because in absence of the rule of law is anarchy, is lawlessness, and lawlessness leads to strife. Strife leads to civil war. We cannot afford in this country, with the sacrifices that so many have made for South Africa to be what it is, to go back basically to the bad history that we come from. We have responsibility to create a better future for the children of this country.
Well, thank you very much, MEC. Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron, and thank you to you, Lieutenant. Just moving on with some other news. It is time actually now for a short weather break. We have more news after that, so do stay with us.